Good afternoon, everyone. This is Brian DeLuca with TRC and the NJ Clean Energy Program. So I want to open up things with a brief welcome to everyone that has joined. This is the Data Center Energy Optimization webinar. Joining me today is Tony O'Donnell. He is an outreach account manager for the NJ Clean Energy Program, and also Jeff Crittenden, who is an account specialist who will be presenting most of the details regarding data centers and certainly diving into various details of the certainly nuances of that business, procedures, all those type of things. My role will be to essentially cover the New Jersey Clean Energy Program, talk about financial incentives, and I'm looking to also highlight case study opportunities that come along to give the folks training today kind of a basic example of what is certainly possible through these programs to receive incentives for your energy efficiency upgrades. I would also like to inform everyone that if you have a question, please type that in the chat box. There is a question and answer period at the end of the webinar, so I'll be happy to go through those. There is someone that will be keeping track of all those, so we can do that as we go along. It's a recorded meeting, so we will kick things off. So I will turn things over to Jeff.
Thanks, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today, in particular about data centers and, just discussing some of the different perspectives from the perspective of an EE program implementer. My personal background, I've served this industry as a supplier, as a customer, and now as a program implementer, and have seen a lot of fluid dynamics over the last 15 to 20 years. I think from the perspective of energy efficiency programs across the country, right around that 15-year mark, that 15 years ago from today, that is, many of the areas of this country, the data centers that started to explode with larger enterprise data centers being installed in different metropolitan areas across the country, you saw the proliferation of much higher capacity. Utilities saw this as, wow, this is load growth. This is great. This is a very specialized customer segment that we need to pay very close attention to. And so right around 10 years ago, you started to see some dedicated energy efficiency programs that were around data centers and only data centers. And a lot of those did very well, but then in the last few years, we've seen kind of an industry contraction where those programs are kind of rolled up in the broader, larger programs. But what we as New Jersey Clean Energy Program is that you or data centers is still a very, very important segment. We still see the increasing load growth. We still see the opportunity. And as a result, we want to ensure that a dedicated attention is paid to this particular customer segment, whether or not it's through custom, whether it's through standard lighting, regardless of the opportunity, we want to give it its just due. So as an agenda, we'll talk about the overall assessment of where energy efficiency resides currently in the data center space, in the IT technology space, primary concerns of IT professionals. I mean, that's something that we've had to address over many, many years to deal with the competing priorities, and we want to just kind of vocalize those. Data center needs, process, culture, talk about what those competing priorities are, and that we're hypersensitive to that, and how we can engage with you and not impact from a counter effects perspective of those specific needs. And then something that we always recommend is to kind of take a step back and look at what the long-term goals are of a data center from an energy perspective, or any customer for that matter, and what types of process improvement initiatives can be deployed that really fit within those long-term strategic plans. And then Brian will touch on the Clean Energy Program and then demonstrate or show some case studies of some projects that have taken place very recently that hopefully we can socialize and demonstrate specific measures that can be deployed in the data centers in New Jersey. So starting off with an overall market assessment, the demand is still very high and it's still growing. And the data is increasing, and therefore data centers are a segment that induces capacity that we're very cognizant of, and we should all be cognizant of as an industry. Data center management has become a very energy aware industry. And so, when I talk about, the historical timelines of the last 15 to 20 years, it's been very impressive to see just how aware it's become with all of the competing priorities that we'll discuss in a few minutes. Historical focus, one of the things we haven't done our just due in terms of this industry, and we focus a lot on co-location facilities, larger data centers, and there is a segment that is very, very important, and it's what we call the embedded data centers, or what I call embedded data centers. And those are the ones that are hidden, or I should say, they're located within much larger campuses, larger buildings. They're a part of a facility, and those are found in just about every commercial sector. And those are the ones that, if we want to draw on any outcome of this presentation, that would be the one key outcome, is to ensure how do we as an industry address those embedded data centers, because in many cases those present the greatest available opportunities moving forward. And so to say reiterate or redefine, embedded, if you have a 5,000 to 8,000 square foot facility in a commercial high rise, or I should say an 8,000 square foot data center in a commercial high rise, it's not something that, we as energy efficiency professionals could just look up in a phone book or a Rolodex. It's somewhere that it's embedded, but it's one that we've often found has tremendous opportunity. And so a very specific example, and let's use the 8,000 square foot. Let's say you have 6 crack units, computer room, air conditioning units, kind of in a circle of wagons format. That facility has maybe undergone multiple changes over the last 5 to 10 years. We're typically seeing energy intensities anywhere from 1,500 to 2,200 kBtu per square foot. And since these are 8760 facilities, you were seeing usage as high as 1 to 1.2 million kWh. That is a lot of consumption for a small, compact piece of real estate. And so as a result, we want to pay attention to that. We want to make sure that we adequately serve that. We're seeing those crop up pretty much in all commercial sectors, healthcare, hospitals. We're even seeing data centers in larger K through 12 or high schools, higher ed, certainly. On the public sector side, you have a lot of governmental entities that are running their own websites. And as a result, they're managing their own data. And so you're seeing Department of Transportation, as an example, has quite significant data centers, quite large, in some cases even standalone, as well as those that are co-located. And then finally, industrial manufacturers that are, in some cases, the data is supporting their manufacturing process, and in other cases, they're supporting a specific website that they're managing. And then we certainly, at the bottom, we don't want to forget our large to standalone enterprise, the large co-location facilities, which still present a tremendous opportunity. And then even on the small end, what we term, you hear the term closets. That is also another area that, once again, it presents opportunities. So our commitment of the New Jersey Clean Energy Program is that we're dealing with the full width and breadth of the industry. One of the industry trends that is taking place right now, or has been, it's not new, it's certainly taken place over the last few years, But the statistics are pointing out that 70% of the data centers currently either have moved their data to co-location facility, or they have plans to move, or I should say higher percentages are considering migration. And so what does that mean? It means that a lot of the existing infrastructure of the facilities and embedded data centers are moving out, or in some cases, completely co-locating. And by co-location, we mean someone else is, you're hiring another entity to manage the data. But we're finding this migration is not necessarily dependent upon customer size or company size. It could be large or small. There's not really any kind of direct correlation. The backup and the redundancy and then the internal costs of managing the data are really the primary motivators. We're seeing proliferation of virtualization, hybrid cloud deployments. This all leading kind of goes hand in glove with co-locating and making co-locations more attractive. From a programmatic perspective, what you may notice, and those of you who may have participated in programs, as an industry, the energy efficiency industry, use the term free ridership, and free ridership essentially is a reflection of the influence the program has. And so if you're going to do something with or without the program, it's considered a free rider. And so in many instances, a lot of these initiatives, particularly in virtualization, while that is incredibly energy efficient, unfortunately, we've had to kind of back away from incentivization of those activities. And so that's across the country. It's been a big movement, and pretty soon you'll see really the entire country considering it a free rider. But that still shouldn't preclude consideration of those types of initiatives, which are by pure definition very efficient. Now, with entities that have strict compliance, strict regulations, strict data security issues, such as governmental entities as an example, they're likely to maintain their own infrastructure. And I think the bottom line is, and something we all have to recognize, is that data is going to continue to increase. And as data continues to increase, there's an increase in hardware. So whether it's on-premise or co-located or somewhere else, self-managed or not, it doesn't matter. There are tremendous opportunities that we need to pay very close attention to as an industry, and that still there's always going to be underserved customers with the aging infrastructure that, once again, we need to address. So what are the challenges? And I'll try to go through these quickly. I mean, these have been often documented, and as I say, most industry professionals are familiar with these because they've been discussed. But the one is frequent changes to infrastructure. That's one I don't know that one in particular gets its sufficient attention. I mean, if you have a data center that's 10 plus years old, there's likely been changes that have taken place within the confined space, where what we've often seen is racks, server racks have been moved, under air diffusers have been moved, hot aisle, cold aisle configurations have changed, and it's really something that you often see. It's not a one-off thing. It's quite common, especially within the embedded data centers that we referenced earlier. And then the other thing, these data integrity, the protection of data. I mean, all of that takes center stage, and so the computer room air conditioning and computer room air handling units are usually engineered for worst case scenarios, backup, there's redundancy. All of those things present physical challenges when you're trying to discuss how to make a particular data center the most efficient it can be. Regulatory, as I mentioned, the redundancy requirements, a huge focus on cybersecurity. Say myopic, but I think what the intention there is that cybersecurity is become a part of our life, and with massive amounts of insurance, I mean, a whole industry of insurance is tied to it. And the trust level was low to begin with, and so we've even seen increases in trust level. One story I always often tell is that once upon a time I was a facility manager, in charge of data center assets, in charge of the data center, but yet still had to get very, very special clearances from the IT professionals to even enter into a facility that I was contractually managing. You hear that story a lot, but it really just emphasizes the trust level, which is very well understood. And then the cultural awards for compliance, not efficiency. And so we are very aware and very sensitive to that all of the regulatory challenges and issues that you have to do is, once again, that takes center stage. And so it's easy to prioritize efficiency out of the mix. I mentioned the supply chain here, and this is definitely no respect to anyone who serves in the supply chain, but this was a challenge 10 years ago. It's much less of a challenge today, but we have seen where the supply chain, they want to sell more equipment, and really we all do, but more equipment versus energy efficiency has created a challenge for us as energy efficiency professionals. And so as a result, we want to make sure that we're including the supply chain in the conversations as much as possible. And by supply chain, consultants, trade allies, contractors that serve this industry. Once again, we know that the sustainability goals are there, but compliance, you aren't on the hook for compliance. Why do we pay you to use less electricity? And this is, we bring this up, and we bring this up because I get asked this almost all the time. Come into a facility, and first question is, what do you get out of this? Why would you do this? And the demand for electricity is increasing. Conservation is right now the most cost-effective resource that we have. And so we're looking at energy efficiency as a resource, not just we're saving you money, but look at it as almost a transactable unit that has specific asset value. Regulatory agencies, they put these in place. And so in many cases, these are ratepayer funded across the country. You as a customer or a data center customer is paying in to a fund which pays for my services. And so I always remind customers that you are already paying for my service, and that, quite frankly, there's money out there that it's time for you to get that money back. And once again, it goes without saying, or maybe it doesn't go without saying that IT personnel, you have competing priorities, as we've discussed, and then this one is not unique to data centers. It's to all verticals that we face on a regular basis. The administrative program of the administrative burden of the programs, which are difficult to navigate. And for us, that's our job, is to make that as easy and seamless for you as possible, so that you're not having to deal with that administrative burden. And then inconsistent industry terminology, we know that you have certain metrics that you're focused on. And so we're making sure that we adjust our vocabulary accordingly. So primary concerns of IT professionals. And so this is unlike anything that when we go to commercial real estate, when we go to industrial facilities, when we go to hospitals, the conversations vary, and they're very different, unique to those specific verticals. But in most cases, over the last 10 to 15 years, many of those have been relatively easy because of the emphasis of energy efficiency within their operations. Data centers, it's a little different. We're protecting data. Data is costly. We're trying to create redundancy. We're trying to ensure critical cooling systems are up and running at all times with no downtime whatsoever. And so this is what data centers do, and they meet regulatory codes and standards. Some of those, are very non-trivial, and they're very imposing. And so when we talk about, let's say, a food processing manufacturer has to face with the EPA or the various governmental agencies, you have the same thing. You have a lot of standards now, and more so in the future, to be concerned with. And then your primary concern is moving data, moving it faster, more efficiently, safer, redundant. It's like a continuous improvement process. It's almost like a manufacturer. As a matter of fact, a lot of energy efficiency programs across the country treat data centers or actually classify data centers in the same bucket as industrials because of the similarities. But that allows us to, I would say, adjust the narrative and or focus on those key elements. Can we process the data, increase volumes, and achieve energy efficiency at the same time? Of course, we know that answer, and we know that we can do that. And so that's going to be our charge here on the clean energy program side, is to make sure that we work within these key focus areas for data centers as opposed to trying to sell widgets or list of measures. We want to talk on your language. So that kind of leads into market characteristics. And what are the characteristics of the verticals? I mentioned that data centers right now reside in pretty much all commercial verticals, or commercial segments, I should say. And so there's individual characteristics. Not all data centers have the same emphasis or focus. A lot of times that focus is more of a characteristic of the respective vertical that it resides in. So like for instance, the commercial and public sector facilities, and in particular, those that are served by real estate services firms. Those embedded data centers, those are an asset, and they have a value attributed to them. And when we speak within that sector, we're not just doing energy efficiency and savings, but we're also talking in terms of asset value. And that there's also a list of common financial concerns as it relates to managing that facility as a whole that we're taking into account holistically. With regards to standalone, many of those are run by real estate investment trusts, commercial, I should say global technology firms, household names that we all know, and national IT service firms. Those are all about security, redundancy, rapidly increasing energy efficiency standards, how to adopt those energy efficiency standards, and the long-term strategies to deploy those. And then on the smaller on-premise facilities, or that you often see within education, industrial, healthcare, hospitals, you have a little bit smaller. You have in-house facility management, but in many cases, no one's really minding the store as far as energy efficiency, high energy intensity. So regardless of the size, we want to make sure that we appeal to those that don't have the internal resources to deal with projects such as energy efficiency projects that would go through a program. So let's recap the needs, the process, and the culture. And what we want to do is on this slide, we want to talk about the data center of the future. And really, this is already happening. We're seeing trends that, from a guideline perspective, there's an organic migration to cloud-based initiatives and co-location, as we discussed earlier, better prepared for these regulations and increased cybersecurity. This is something that's taking place as we speak. And then critical cooling systems. That's what us as energy efficiency professionals, what we're most concerned with is maintaining the high efficient cooling systems, mission critical systems for those facilities, your facilities. We want a greater understanding of energy efficiency codes and standards, and that is taking place as well. There's a lot that's being done in the area of free cooling, airside, waterside economization, much better, certainly than 10 years ago. And this, all of us on the phone should be applauded for this. We've pushed for this, and that has really taken place in a great way, and there's more standards to come. And that's just simply resulted in a better stewardship of resources through process improvement. And then there's an overarching employee engagement where used to be, once again, widget-based sales process where we try to push energy efficiency measures. what we want to do is kind of sit down with the IT professionals, especially the ones embracing efficiency, and talk about it from a behavioral perspective. And we're seeing this, that there is more than willingness to adopt behavioral measures, not just individual projects and shiny new parts, but what behaviorally can change to improve the overall operation. And that simply resulted in better teamwork and communication throughout the value chain. And so that kind of tees up what we're seeing, and it tees up maybe a suggested process to consider. And this by no means is, I would say, the end-all playbook, but what we're about to talk about here is, how do we think about it, strategically? How do we think about it holistically? How do we think about it from a data integrity, a process improvement, and weave all of those together in a conversation that results in really a win-win for everyone? And something that was born out of industrial process is something we called strategic energy management, and something similar can be deployed for data centers. And we're actually starting to see programs kind of sprout up throughout the country that focus 100% on data centers as it relates to this process. And by process improvement approach, the starting point is always on solving a problem. What are the operational challenges? What can make the operation better? What can we do behaviorally? And to think about all of the aspects of process improvement, and then implement many of you may have seen this through Energy Star. There's other energy efficiency programs and other just process improvement initiatives, even non-energy, that talk about plan, do, check, act, that result in the benefits of, once again, better process, reduce cost, reduced energy use, and then finally stewardship of the ratepayer funds that you're already paying into. And the impact, what you see on the screen right now is, you see the far left hand, you see the predicted energy use. Well, that's a model. It's a statistical model, and it's one that for data centers, it's actually relatively easy to figure out. Most even data centers that have massive swings in data management are relatively easy to predict over a period of time, over a lengthy period of time, and develop a model. And so you see the blue line extended across. If we do nothing, you have, basically the same energy use that you would expect by doing, energy efficiency measures on a wide scale, not just one project here and there, but full scale of low cost, no cost, all the way up to capital. Then you start to see the reduction in energy usage over time. And so the orange line represents what you would often see. And 1, 2, and 3, those are individual, 1, 2, 3, and 4, those are individual measures, and simply calculating from a statistical perspective what the energy usage is in real time. It's a method that we're starting to use more and more, which is kind of ironic. We're using data analytics, and data intelligence to calculate savings within a data management system. And it's so far, this has been a very effective method to prove out savings over time. And I'll just talk about this. I mean, this is just a hypothetical monthly progress of events. When you start off, if you start off with your O&M opportunities, those provide savings that feed and create cost justification for the larger capital projects, and then you rinse and repeat. I mentioned data centers typically, if anything, always change. They're very fluid. You're never 100% efficient. You're always hoping to be asymptotic to that ideal standard. And so as a result, this is a process. It's a long process, and we highly recommend it to maintain the utmost efficiency within facilities. And so this process is not something that's being done today in New Jersey. but we encourage those to investigate it further and to consider an approach like this if there is serious consideration for the types of reductions that legislatively we're seeing across the board. So with that, I will turn it over to Brian, who will dig into the clean energy program and some of the programs that we offer that are very, very relevant to data centers.
All right, great. Thank you, Jeff. So normally the way that I start off with talking about the clean energy program is I say that if you're not using it and you're doing energy efficiency projects, then you really need to be making a phone call to us. We are here and we are driven to helping customers, ratepayers who are paying towards these funds and towards this program to be able to access those incentives properly. But we certainly understand that there is a myriad of programs available. And the reason for the various programs that you may see on the program website are to simply offer incentives for different types of customers, different unique customers, whether they be large, they be small. Are you doing a comprehensive project? Are you doing a single incentive type of project? So we're trying different ways to provide you with a benefit here. Now, certainly data centers, obviously, as you heard from Jeff, they have tons of opportunity to save energy, but back in my days of doing energy audits, especially for any type of facility that's industrial, has a process to it, there can be lots of great ideas, but it all comes down to, can it be implemented safely to still deliver services? So we are respectful to that, and we understand there can be those hurdles in that the engineers tell you you can trim down something by 20%, but perhaps that's running it a bit tight to make sure you are delivering consistent services. So want to make sure everyone's clear on we are here to help. If you have questions, any type of things about the programs, we are here to assist you. I've been with the program for over 12 years now, and we've spoken to anybody and everybody essentially about these programs. So let's go to the next slide and kick things off a little bit. Okay, so why would you use these programs? Well, I mean, the simple comment that you've heard a few times already is that you can get simply incentive funds for your energy efficiency project. But there also comes with that, it's not just the money proposition, but it's also the support of energy professionals that can assist you through the process. Now, I will say that we can't design a project for you. One, due to contractual requirements as group and state program, we can't have any type of liability towards that. So what we're here to assist you with is, it's not uncommon to get a question saying someone's proposing this type of system that should get X amount of incentive and work for me. Typically, we will ask a few questions. If you're talking to an engineer on our staff or a certain specialist that has an affinity towards data centers, such as Jeff, and something that looks questionable, we won't flat out say, well, that's not going to work at all, but we'll ask a few careful questions to make sure you're doing your own diligence for that, so you're asking the right questions. Again, it's all back to knowledge, which is a couple things, as I just mentioned. Support. We are here to help you through the process. We can't do the applications for you. There is paperwork. It's a state program. That's just how it goes. But we are here to assist in answering your questions to make sure you hopefully get it right the first time. But also understand that we respect that these are potentially large projects. They could be complex, and there'll be some things to work through. We're not expecting folks applying to the program in every case to be experts, and that's why we're, again, here to help. The program also offers various tools. Certainly on the Clean Energy Learning Center on the website you can access. There's a bevy of information available there to certainly take advantage of, to understand what can you do, how can you save energy, so on and so forth. So let's go to the next slide, please. So how does it work? Well, so we can work with you to identify energy efficiency opportunities. We have certain programs that are geared towards providing actual on-site assistance, to doing a light walkthrough audit analysis to identify some of the low-hanging fruit. You know, that's typical, or to have that more in-depth conversation. Obviously, COVID has thrown things for a bit of a loop, but for on-site type of presence. But we are more than happy to have those various discussions with you to kind of figure out what the opportunities are. Then when we know that, and we know also timeline information, so maybe there are 5 or 6 projects that you wish to tackle. You have a rough timeline for when you wish to actually implement those upgrades. We can take that information plus some high-level information about your project, cost, estimated savings potentially, and we could try to put together a basic recommendation of here are your program opportunities. So we would say, okay, for example, there is a program called Smart Start. We have another one called Pay for Performance, Direct Install. These all have different names. They have different requirements, so on and so forth. But that's our goal, is to identify which programs are your best option, and then talk to you about the pros and cons of each and those next steps. So that's the, again, benefit for us to be assisting you with this. So just a couple brief example type of projects that are certainly aligned towards the data center sector are hot and cold aisle separation. That's something that we've seen through our Smart Start custom program. We've also seen it through the large energy user program as well. Certainly, next thing is cutting underfloor air pressure rather. UPS upgrades are fairly common. We do see them also often as well. Centralized control system for the crack units, slowing things down, speeding things up based on demand is a very common thing. We've seen that time and time again. And then also water side economization as well. We've also seen upgrades of the actual computer systems, the IT equipment themselves. We've also dealt with projects and data centers that are actually expanding. And so you're not reducing your overall usage, but you would be reducing your anticipated usage once you expand for that as well. So just to be clear, this is covering existing buildings as well as new construction as well. So let's jump to the next slide, please. Value propositions. As I always tend to kind of say, if you are working for your company in this field and you're able to deliver incentive funds because you were able to get a few applications completed and work through the process, or to work with other partners to identify financial incentives, I think you're a hero. I mean, just to be blunt with it, if you can identify incentives that were not identified by anybody else at your group, and you're bringing in 50 to 100,000 or $500,000 plus, that's a great proposition, obviously, to pursue these incentives that would have otherwise not been identified. The other thing too is that with you obtaining incentives, that can free up capital to do more project. So maybe on the, call it internal docket, you can only do 3 out of the 4 projects because the payback wasn't really feasible. But now with the incentives in play, you can now obviously do that 4th project potentially. So this can open up a lot of opportunity for you and the company, of course, to just simply doing more and more project, which leads towards why we're here. We are reducing energy consumption, usage. Obviously, that's going to cut down on the emissions from the generation of power. There's lots of good reasons why this makes sense. And then as well, this can lead towards people finding this to be a bit somewhat addictive. If you're doing something, maybe your fellow colleague or your other employee may be inspired to obviously do things as well, such as those SEM programs that were spoken about a bit earlier. So again, there's lots of reasons why this makes a lot of sense. Again, new equipment's always good, more efficient equipment's good, reducing maintenance, all those things just make a ton of sense. So let's go next slide, please. Okay, just a quick example energy map. So, certainly PUE is a language that I'm sure everyone on this call knows and speaks. So here is an example of, this is a reduction in the cooling load for the certain data center. So again, this is all a kW number that you're seeing here. They're not obviously percentages, but obviously if you're cutting down 133.7 kW, that's going to lead towards a massive amount of kWh savings, which again, you're taking the incentive plus the energy savings as a wonderful benefit. So move the next slide, please. Here are just some example opportunities of things we have seen. So this is not made up. These are real numbers of a project that we've seen that includes 3 different energy conservation measures. So we have your crack fan optimization, your cold aisle containment, and your brand new cooling tower with a VFD on the fans and pumps. And so overall, this is a project that, with the incentive, is a 2.3-year payback. I mean, every group has its own payback threshold, and I think I've typically heard, usually from the larger groups, that a 3-year payback tends to be the threshold for things to move ahead. So it is possible that, due to capital funding and things like that, they weren't only able to do, or I'm sorry, we're only able to do maybe ECM number 3 only, or maybe it was only 1 and 2, and based on the incentive being in play, maybe that nudged it over that kind of threshold. So that's the kind of stuff we're trying to instill in the group here today. Is ask the question. If you're not sure if something could be considered for incentive, talk to us. That's something you're going to hear me say multiple times prior to this call being over. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some of the customer case studies. So these are obviously real projects. Obviously, names have been taken off for obvious reasons, but here is a large energy user program project, which we won't have time to go through each individual program today, but this is a program which is meant to serve the largest energy consumers in the state. Quick off the napkin type of calculation, you could say that these are customers that have an energy spend annually across all of their New Jersey facilities in the amount of at least $5 million worth of, again, costs. So that's delivery and the supplies. These are very large customers. This project here is a $766,000 project. The incentives obviously were quite attractive at almost $400,000. The annual savings were about $116,000, leading towards a 3.15-year payback. Without that incentive, this would be approximately around a 6 or so plus year payback project. Might not have moved ahead based on that criteria. Being as at 3.15 years, this obviously opted this certain customer to move ahead with the project. Next slide. Okay, an IT support service. So this is a smaller facility, could be a larger customer overall, larger entity, but they have a smaller facility that fit within our small business program known as Direct Install. This was a very comprehensive, including LED lighting upgrades, HVAC system, economizers, furnace controls, and electric fuel use economizers for the AC system. $117,000 project. The program paid almost $82,000 worth of that project. Savings of $24,000. Simple payback of 1.45 years. This is not cherry picking projects. This is real project. These are real incentives. These are real paybacks. Not every single project gets to this level, but it is not uncommon to see this. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is from our Smart Start Buildings program, which is what the SSB stands for. This was a basic lighting project, so this was a $172,000 project. Says about $14,000. Obviously, the savings are shown there on the screen at $30,000. Simple payback of 5.3 years. So not a great payback overall, but it's still very attractive to allow customer to move ahead. Obviously, customers will do lighting upgrades, certainly in that 5 to 6, 7-year payback range, because you're also getting maintenance savings, which are not included here. So the real payback may be closer to that 4.5, maybe 4, maybe a bit more aggressive, depending upon their current lighting situation. So these are real numbers. Again, it's not including every single little factor that could show this better. But at 5.3 years, it's not the best, but it's not bad by any stretch of the means. So we can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so before we jump into the Q&A, we've kind of shown you a lot of information, provide you with a lot of opportunities that can be simply discussed, pursued, etc. I really implore everybody to ask questions. If you're not wanting to ask questions on this call, please contact us. It's always good to have that exploratory call to just understand a bit more about the program opportunities, what you're looking into, et cetera, et cetera. So really, if you're not using these programs, you are truly missing out. So with that, I want to thank you, but I want to obviously give time for question and answer. So I will, turn things over to, I believe, Tony, who I think is collecting those questions.
Yes, I was. And thanks, Brian. Thanks, Jeff. You both did a really good job explaining everything. I have a couple of questions that I got during the webinar, and I'll take these a little bit slowly. So some people like to listen really intently and formulate the questions at the end. So we'll try to give you a couple minutes, but since I do have a couple of questions, I'll throw them out there. And they both came during Jeff's section. So the first one was, Jeff, you talked about demand reduction. So regarding demand reduction, you mentioned that for some industries, equipment is built for worst case scenario usage. Is this a significant consideration for the data center industry? Put another way, does the high demand usage profile for data centers look similar to the high demand usage profile for electricity in general?
Really, there's no comparison. If I understand the question correctly, and apologize if I don't, but the high demand of data centers, I mean, there's other similar industries. If you look at primary metals or steel mills and things like that, you see similar profiles. But in general, it's its own beast, and the whole idea of redundancy it's definitely a critical one, and it's definitely critical to the industries, and so we understand where redundancy resides, and so that we talk about it as a challenge, but it's not really a challenge overall with the idea that we can do so many things with or without redundancy. But I think as it relates to the demand, what we saw, and I'll just speak to, like, let's say Chicago, rapidly overtook, and it is the number one customer from a demand perspective, superseding automotive manufacturing. I mean, superseding the food processing industry, primary metals, all of the things that were previously the largest demand users. It's number one here, and I know it's number one in many areas of the country, metropolitan areas such as Chicago. So I think that if we're talking, maybe I'll also just address, if we're talking demand response, there are opportunities for that, but it's very hard, obviously, given the 8460 nature of data management. It does create a bit of a challenge. But capacity-wise, utilities are looking at this as we need to invest more in energy efficiency programs so that we are able to adequately deal with the infrastructure. Because as I said at the very outset, data is continuing to increase, and whether it's in the cloud, virtualized, co-locate, it doesn't matter, that there's going to be an increase in hardware over time as data increases. So hopefully I answered that question.
Okay, it's great. And so one other, a bit more specific question. So, and I think this came up. You had a good slide where you showed the different levels of data collection. You had the really large off-site, and then you had a couple categories that were on-site. And so that question at that point was, for those businesses who have on-site data equipment, are there ways to sub-meter that equipment to get a better idea of the energy use profile of it? And do you recommend that?
Yes, we do. As a matter of fact, we recently did a project in New Jersey where a customer actually did that themselves to baseline. I mean, they wanted to, they knew as part of the program that we would calculate the savings, but they wanted to do a parallel path and do it themselves. And they did it for other reasons too. There were other benefits to them having that data from the perspective. And so it's relatively easy to do. I don't want to marginalize the cost. I don't want to say it's cheap, but can be done at the main panel or the UPS. There's ways and means of doing that. And there's individual, a lot of times for those embedded data centers, there's I would say a compact number of crack units that you can do individual metering to get a handle on the overall critical cooling system. But for the most part, if you're going to calculate the PUE or the power utilization effectiveness, you're going to want to do it right at the input of the power input of that data center, and it is a very, very good idea to do so.
Okay, thanks. So that was the couple of questions that we had submitted. There was another question that just about future presentations that I answered separately. I guess give it another few seconds, but while I do that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We're right up at the top of the hour, so I know people tend to try to get in and out on time, so we'll do that. If you have a question in your attendee that you think of after the webinar ends, you can always reach out to us. And having said that, again, thanks to Jeff and Brian for a really good job on presentations. And I guess we'll sign off. Jeff, do you have any, or Brian, do you have any last things that you wanted to point out? Or
That's all for me. Thank you, folks.
okay, great. All right, thank everyone for attending. We look forward to seeing you at one of our future webinars. Have a good day.